Welcome to this special episode of the Danger Close podcast. Over the next few weeks, I'll be answering listener and viewer questions about the novels in the lead up to the publication of Red Sky Mourning, available June 18th, 2024. Will there be spoilers? Absolutely. Be sure and stay tuned after the Q&A to listen to Ray Porter read the prologue. This episode of the Danger Close podcast is brought to you by Bravo Company Manufacturing. Here we go. Little Q&A on True Believer. Each of my novels has a theme. The first book, The Terminal List, was a novel of revenge without constraint. The second novel, True Believer, was one of violent redemption. I started off with a one-word theme, redemption, and very quickly added violent redemption to that. And I find that having a theme helps guide the writing process because everything has to go back to that theme, whether it's directly or, more importantly, indirectly. So this was a story of violent redemption. And from Instagram, this is from B. Barlow. What sort of research went into the African details? The details in True Believer of the hunting section were my favorite part from any of the books. I would love a whole hunting series. I actually hear that quite a bit. And I was already writing the second novel, already writing True Believer before I'd even sent the first one to Simon & Schuster. So I didn't have an agent, didn't have a publisher. I always knew that I was going to write 2 books. And I think I got that from John Grisham, who wrote A Time to Kill first, and he couldn't give that book away. And then he wrote The Firm, and that one takes off, becomes an international bestseller. Tom Cruise stars in the movie. Then they go back and make the first book into a movie starring Matthew McConaughey, and he was on track for one legal thriller every year. So I thought if John Grisham had gotten discouraged after the sales of the first book and didn't write The Firm, well, he might just now be retiring from the practice of law somewhere. So I was always going to write 2. Also, Vince Flynn, self-published Term Limits, his first book. And I thought that those 2 examples really made me think I will certainly writing 2. And if both don't hit, then perhaps I'll go into some contingency planning. So for the African details, I went to Mozambique because I thought it was so important to actually go to a place to put the boots on the ground. In the first book, I'd been to Iraq, I'd been to Afghanistan, I'd been to most of the places that I was writing about because I was still I was in my last year and a half of my time in the SEAL teams as I started writing. So I couldn't just zip off and go do research for a few weeks at different places. So I used places that I'd already been, was quite familiar with. For this one, for True Believer, I had been to Odessa years and years ago before I even joined the military, but I hadn't been to Mozambique. And I knew that was going to be very important, specifically for this part of the story. So James Reese needs to learn to live again. He needs to find that next mission in life. He needs to find that next purpose. And that's something that a lot of people leaving the military, and not just the military, I'm sure it's any transition in life, whether that's is a job, switching occupations, a divorce, death of a loved one. We're all going to go through these transitions in life. So in this case, James Reese needed to go someplace, learn to live again, find that mission, find that purpose, and that was the wilds of Mozambique. So it was going to be so important to the story. I knew I had to go there. So I went over there for a couple weeks, went to the exact camp that I describe in the novel. So I get to talk to the professional hunters, the PHs, talk to the trackers, and take pictures of the dirt and the rocks and the plants and the trees and the animals, and really get to know that place and bring that experience to the book. So it was really important for me to go there specifically for that part of the novel. And that's probably why it resonates with a lot of people. All right. So this is from Tactiflops and also from Instagram. Most authors write pieces of themselves and their stories and characters. Freddie Strain was such an incredible character in True Believer, and his presence carries over into the other novels in the series. From listening to you speak about yourself at book signings and on podcasts, would you say that Freddie's character is the one that resonates the most with you personally? I don't know if it's the one that resonates the most with me personally. Certainly aspects of his character do, but he was also a character that I thought was going to be a recurring character. And there's a few things that have changed. So my process when I start writing. I have that title right from the beginning, even if it might change later. I don't like to be wasting any bandwidth thinking about a title as I'm writing. I like all my bandwidth to go into the story. So I write myself essentially 2 letters, and I read essentially what you'd find on the back of a paperback or on the flap of a hardcover. And so I read that back to myself, and I ask, is this worth the next year and a half of my life? And if the answer is yes, then I read it again. And I ask, if someone was walking, let's say, by a Hudson News in the airport and picks this book off the shelf and reads that description, is that description enough for them to invest time into this story that they're never going to get back? And that's something I think about quite a bit. People are trusting me with their time. And so whether it's a book, whether it's the TV show, whether it's this podcast, a social media post, I always want to add value to people's lives. So I do that. And if both those answers are yes, then I take that, essentially a 1-page executive summary, and turn that into an outline. And in this case, the outline had Freddie Strain living. So, in the first book, there was something also that changed. In the terminal list, I had something happen, and I won't say exactly what it is. I hope my editor would have caught it if I didn't in the writing of it, but I had in the outline a specific thing that was going to happen in a specific chapter. And I started writing that chapter, and it just came out differently. And I'm so glad it came out the way it came out now. Looking back, I think an editor would have looked at it and said, maybe you might want to rethink this. Because I get very few notes from my editor. They're usually something along the lines of, can you explain this for someone who is not in the military or is not familiar with this weapon system, or something along those lines. Or, hey, can you describe this a little more for people who haven't read an earlier book? Those are kind of the notes that I get. So nothing specific as far as major changes. But I hope in this case that had I written it the way I had it in the outline for the terminal list, that they would have found it and brought it up to me and said, maybe you should rethink that. They didn't have to, because as I'm writing, I just couldn't write it the way that it was written in the outline. So, and same thing with Freddie Strain. He was supposed to, and this is the first time I think I'm talking about this, he was supposed to live all the way through True Believer and go forward into the next novels. But once I got to that section of the novel, it became quite clear. Sometimes things just naturally change. So when I have that outline, it's more of a guide. And I knew there's a few things that need to happen. I like knowing the destination. I like knowing where I'm going. But some things are going to change as I do research, as the characters develop, because I don't know the characters really, if they're a new character, until I put them in conversation with other characters. So I might have their background, whether they were a SEAL or Army Special Forces, or a politician or a general or a lobbyist or whatever they might be, but I don't know them yet until I know if they're good or bad or kind of ambiguous, but I don't know them yet as characters, as people, until I put them in dialogue. So once I got to those sections of dialogue and character development, and then I got to that section of the book where, once again, spoiler alert, where Freddie dies, that wasn't supposed to go down like that, but in the actual writing of it, it just had to happen that way. So anyway, that's how Freddie's character came about. But is he the one that resonates the most with me? No, I think James Reese is the one that resonates most with me, and Rafe Hastings as well. But if you've heard me at book signings and other places, Freddie Strain has a child with special needs, as do we. So that part was very personal, and that was one that I didn't know if I was going to put in the book either, and it wasn't in the outline. And then as I started writing the character to humanize him a little bit, that just was naturally probably at the forefront of my thinking because of my personal experience, and that's how that got woven into the story. The Sig Sauer P365 X Macro. Slim and easily concealable. 3.7-inch barrel or a compensated 3.1-inch barrel. Expansion chamber slide reduces muzzle rise by up to 30%. M1913 Picatinny rail for accessories. Nitron-coated finish. X-ray 3 sights for precise sight acquisition, day or night. Patented 17+1 capacity magazine. The Sig Sauer P365 X Macro. The choice of James Reese and me, Jack Carr. All right, moving on, also from Instagram here, and this is from Fern's Feed. Did you have this novel planned when writing the first one? If so, how'd you plan it? And if not, how do you make it coherent to the other book? So I had it in this one-page executive outline type form, but I'd have to go back and see exactly what changed. But I knew that the character was going to go on a journey and would have to go on this journey of redemption. And I knew I wanted it to be more geopolitical in nature, not as there's always going to be personal elements, but I wanted the first one to be extremely personal and not necessarily a save the world type of a novel. And then for this one, I knew I wanted to switch it up. And I knew I didn't want to just take what had worked in the first book and drop it in to the next one, because I think that would be the safe thing to do. Certainly not the safe thing to do is to send your character on a journey across the Atlantic and have all the hunting sections that I had in the novel. And I thought really that my editor might say, you know what, take this first third of the book out. It's not really necessary. And she didn't. Emily Bessler is my editor and publisher at Simon & Schuster, Emily Bessler Books, Atria, and it's just absolutely amazing. And I wanted to do something different than I thought that most authors would do in my situation. So I wanted to take James Reese on this journey, and I thought it would be disingenuous to the reader or the listener that if he just all of a sudden showed up and started on this new mission after the traumatic events of the Terminal List. I thought that would be disingenuous and not honest. So I wanted to take him on this journey all the way across the Atlantic where he still thinks he's dying, and up to Mozambique and then into the African bush to really learn to live again. So I thought that was an important part of the book and the series in general, and I thought something that would differentiate me because it's a risk, and I guess by nature I'm a risk taker, and I always have been. So that's how that came about. So it wasn't exactly the way that it is when I was writing the first book, but I had a general idea of where things were going. All right, next one, Mr. Mrdepnerhikes. Okay. Mr. Depner Hikes. And this is from Instagram also. Small detail, but I was stoked when Strain introduces Reese to Sturgill Simpson. Oh yeah. Was the Sturgill reference drawing on your own musical taste, or is it specific to the characters and the dialogue? Well, my own, but also happens to be specific to the characters and the dialogue as well. So it was it's always fun for me to incorporate things like that humanize the characters. So yeah, Sturgill, awesome. Next one. This is from ERE. It's MA 1776. Will James Reese ever go back for his M4 and nods buried on the beach? Yeah, I know. That's he was supposed to go back at some point for those, and then when it didn't really work out with the flow of the story, I thought, well, maybe in a future novel he'll go back for those. So yeah, they're still there. They're still there. All right, here we go. At the Jack of Spades. Did you plan to bring back Major Charlie Gerbil Serco in a later book? You designed this character very well in terms of bringing out the young Fobbit career with his with this image. I expected him to make a return towards the end of the book after his careless action in chapter 25 and receive some kind of humiliating end, much like Philip Strand does. So this is one of those ones, maybe I should have gone back and done something with him. So I hadn't thought about it until this very moment. So thanks. Who knows? Maybe he'll make an appearance in a future novel. We'll see. All right, moving on to X. This is from Behads 10. When you wrote the book, was it after Chris Pratt was cast? If so, did this change any depiction of James Reese's character? And no, it was not after Chris Pratt was cast. Hadn't even gotten the first book to Simon & Schuster yet. So the book came out in 2019. And but I was writing it in the summer of 2016. And so Chris was cast, or he wasn't even cast, he optioned it before the first book even came out. So my friend Jared Shaw, he gave me a call in November of 2017. So a few months before the book comes out. First book comes out in March of 2018, and he wanted to thank me for something that I did for him in the SEAL teams, and I I didn't even really think much about it when I did it, but we got back in touch with each other, and he said, "Hey, I heard you have a novel coming out." And I said, "Yeah, it's coming out in a few months." And he said, "Well, I'd like to give it to a friend of mine." And I said, "Who's that?" And he said, "Chris Pratt," which is interesting because Chris Pratt is the person that I thought of as playing James Reese from the very beginning, from writing the first sentence. As a child of the 80s, it's very natural for me to think of things in terms of who's going to play this character, who's going to portray this character in a film. So I didn't think of Chris Pratt as the character. I thought of Chris Pratt portraying the character on film and bringing him to life on film. And back then, and so that's December of 2014, I think I wrote the first words, Chris Pratt was in Parks and Rec and in Zero Dark 30. So I got to see that transformation from his character on Parks and Rec to a SEAL operator in Zero Dark 30. And it was a very stark transformation. So Chris then read the book in December of 2017 and called the first week in January of 2018. So a few months before the book even came out, to option it. So that's that. Here we go. Also from X, Ryan Henrik 1. Do you regret cutting Freddie Strain's time short in the series? Yeah, so I talked about that, and no, don't regret that. It was right for the story, and for me, it's always about honoring the story. J Falcon 7166. When can we expect to see this in live action? All right, so it's been announced. You can go to officialjackcarr.com and check out the blog section where I talk a little more about it, but it is scheduled to start filming after we're done with the Terminal List Dark Wolf. So True Believer is set to start filming in the months ahead after we finish Dark Wolf. So hopefully coming soon. And from Facebook, here we go. Carl Schaefer. How did you come up with the character of Oliver Gray? Is he based on certain people in real life? Well, I wanted to make someone that was definitely not appealing. And I've done a lot of research and reading espionage and spies and duplicity and how they got away with things back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and how that's changed, obviously, with the advent of these different technologies. But I just needed someone that was extremely unappealing. So hopefully Oliver Gray fit that. And it'd be very interesting to see who portrays him on film in True Believer. Looking forward to that casting. And here we go. Mike Watkins, also from Facebook here. When doing the research for this book, did you go to Odessa? And if so, did you range where that shot that killed Freddie was to determine if it was possible? So I went to Odessa before I even joined the military. So in the early 90s, I was in Ukraine. And I wasn't going to be able to go there for True Believer because I spent my time in Africa, in Mozambique. So this is one of the ones where I thought about the places that I'd been in the past, places that I was familiar with, places that worked with the storyline, and Odessa really worked for this. And I went into the catacombs back then, so the tunnel systems under the city, and I just really have really distinct memories of being there. So that's how that made it into the book. And let's see here. This is from Kevin Rayl, R-A-Y-L. Are there any plans to write a spin-off or one-off on the exploits of Jonathan and Richard Hastings and the Sleuth Scouts or Rafe in the future? Stay tuned. I have one more here from Facebook, Derek Clark. Was it the government that missed the redaction of Morocco late in the book or a publication slip? Well, don't tell anybody. But so I submitted the first 3 books to the Department of Defense Office of Pre-Publication and Security Review just to be safe. They were closer to my time in the military. So while the book was there, I'm continuing to edit. And so I'm continuing to work on it, continuing to improve it, continuing to refine. And so I'm not sure if they just missed it or if it was part of the refinement later. I don't know, but I won that on appeal. So I appealed the redactions in True Believer, and of the 58 redactions, I won on 37 of them. So you can take the hardcover of True Believer and compare those redactions to the paperback in True Believer and see what the government redacted and then what I won on appeal. So, luckily Morocco was one of the ones that I won on appeal, and I used Morocco because I had also been there, in the early 90s. So before my time in the military. So interesting that they took that out in the when they redacted, because I'd never been there in uniform, never even talked to anybody really that had been there in uniform, had no touch points with it from my time in the military. It just fit, once again, as far as locations went. It made sense for the characters to go there, to train there, and then to move on up into Europe from that location. So it was a place that I'd been, a place that I was familiar with. I'd been to Marrakesh, had great memories of being there as a kid. I remember the sights, the sounds, and the smells of Morocco. I absolutely love Morocco. And so that's how it came in very naturally, and it fit with the book. So it wasn't forced in. And then it was redacted, and then I won on appeal. So yeah, that's how that went. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions on social channels for True Believer. Tune in next week when I'll be answering questions about the third novel in the James Reese Terminalist series, Savage Son. Be sure like and subscribe. Go to officialjackcarr.com and check out the new merch that's available there. And also stay tuned after this for a reading of the prologue by Ray Porter. Until the next time, take care out there. Stay safe. Be strong. Keep fighting.
Somewhere, a true believer is training to kill you.
Gunmen affiliated with Islamic terrorist group Al-Shabaab stormed the university.
Four masked gunmen attacked the Westgate shopping mall in Nairobi.
ISIS members armed with assault rifles and explosives.
Two Islamic terrorists.
Authorities arrested 9 gunmen.
He's training day and night. His run ends when the enemy stops chasing him. He doesn't care how hard it is. He knows he only wins or dies. He doesn't go home. He is home. He only knows the cause.
True Believer, a novel of violent redemption. The second novel in the James Reese Terminalist series.
Prologue. London, England, November. Ahmed turned up his collar and cursed the snow. He'd never liked the cold, despite his hometown of Aleppo being a far less temperate destination than most Westerners envisioned. He'd found Italy's Mediterranean coast in the summertime to be a paradise, and would have gladly made it his home. His current bosses, however, wanted him in London. Frigid, dreary, snowy London. It was temporary, he was told. 6 months' work with his head down and his mouth shut, and he could live wherever he wanted. His plan was to travel back south, find an honest job, and then send for his family. Tonight, his job was to drive the van. His destination was the medieval market village of Kingston-upon-Thames in southwest London. Ahmed didn't know the nature of his cargo and didn't much care so long as it was unloaded quickly. Whatever he was carrying was heavy. He felt the brakes struggle to handle the load whenever he stopped at the many traffic signals along his route. He turned the white Ford Transit delivery van's heat to its maximum setting and lit a cigarette. Traffic was terrible, even for a Friday evening. Ahmed pulled the cell phone from his pocket. 7:46 p.m. He'd allowed himself plenty of leeway to get to the marketplace on time, but the weather was slowing things down, not to mention the throngs of drivers and pedestrians heading toward what must have been some sort of festival. Children bundled up for the cold, holding hands with parents and siblings, were everywhere. The sight made him think of his own family, crowded into a refugee camp somewhere in Turkey. At least they were no longer in Syria. The van moved at a pedestrian pace as he tapped the horn to part the crowd. He jammed on the brakes and inhaled sharply as a little girl in a pink puffy jacket scurried across the road in his headlights. He turned left and entered the marketplace, stopping the van in front of the address that he'd been given at the garage and turning on the emergency flashers. His eyes strained as he looked through the frosted windows to confirm he was in the right spot, his bosses having been so adamant regarding the precise location of his unloading point. From a bird's-eye view, the marketplace was the shape of a large triangle, wide at one end and narrow at the other. Ahmed's van sat idling at the base end of that triangle, unnoticed by the happy crowds attending the German Christmas market. The shopping district was busy on a normal evening, but with the holiday event in full swing, it was packed. A recent online article had highlighted the quaint festival, and families from all over London and the surrounding suburbs had come to experience its wonders firsthand. Shoppers filled the storefronts, ate in the cafes and pubs, and strolled the booths selling everything from hats and scarves to hot spiced wine, warm pretzels, nutcrackers, candle arches, and traditional wooden ornaments. The already charming town market looked like an alpine village with snow-covered A-frame booths, strung with lights, punctuated by an enormous Christmas tree towering above it all. Ahmed looked around and saw no sign of the men who were to unload the cargo. "All this congestion must have slowed them down," he thought, as he dialed a number on his phone per his instructions and waited impatiently for an answer. "Hello. Ana hunak. Antazar." The line went dead. Ahmed looked at the LCD screen to see whether the call had dropped or if the other caller had simply hung up. He shrugged. The explosion was deafening. The market's snowy cobblestone streets held thousands of shoppers, and those closest to the van were simply vaporized by the detonation. They were the lucky ones. The steel shrapnel that had been embedded directionally into the explosive device raked into the crowd like 1,000 claymore mines, killing, maiming, shredding, and amputating everything in its path, taking future generations before they even existed. A joyful Christmas gathering was now a twisted war zone. Scattered among the wreckage of charred wooden shopping booths, broken glass, tangles of hanging lights, and broken tables were scores of the dead and dying. Those who could move and who weren't totally dazed from the shockwave surged toward the apex of the triangular market, rushing to escape the carnage. That end narrowed significantly and was now strewn with the remains of the festival, forced there by the power of the high explosive charge. The debris-choked street was constricted even further by cars parked illegally at the mouth of the triangle. The human wave jammed to a stop in the narrow bottleneck of buildings, cars, and rubble, the panicked mob pushing, shoving, and heaving like stampeding cattle. The young were trampled underneath the old, the weak forsaken by the powerful. The confusing scene was such that, at first, few even noticed the gunfire. Two men wielding Soviet-made PKM belt-fed machine guns opened up on the crowd from the flat third-story rooftops above, one on either side of the bottleneck. Several 7.62 by 54 mm R rounds tore through the mass of humanity, shredding bodies in their path. Those below, many already wounded from the van's deadly blast, had no chance for escape. The crowd was packed together so tightly that even the dead did not fall to the ground, but rather were held up like sticks in a bundle by the unrelenting human wave. The shooters had each linked multiple belts of ammunition together to prevent having to reload, and the steel rain fell until each man's belt ran dry. The firing lasted over a minute. The men dropped the empty weapons, barrels glowing white-hot from their sustained fire, and made their way down into the chaos below. The market's gutters ran red with blood as they stepped onto what had moments before been a street filled with the joy of the season. Surveillance footage would later show the two men move to opposite ends of the outdoor market and find positions on the street that would be the most likely routes that first responders would take to treat the wounded. Blending in with the dead, they waited more than an hour to detonate the suicide vests strapped to their bodies, murdering police officers, firefighters, medical personnel, and journalists, and creating a new level of terror for 21st century Europe. 440 miles to the southeast, Vasily Andrenov looked at the bank of 4 giant flat-screen monitors in front of him and admired the turmoil. It was being reported that this was the deadliest terror attack in England's history. Not since the height of the Blitz in 1940 had this many Londoners been killed in a single event. That casualty figures were cresting 300 and expected to climb did not appear to bother him. That half of those killed were children, and that there were not enough trauma centers in all of London to deal with the number of wounded bothered him even less. The room was completely silent. Andrenov preferred it that way. He read the news tickers across the bottom of each screen and sipped his vodka. The media was on the scene before many of the wounded could even be evacuated. Their satellite trucks added to the traffic gridlock and slowed the progress of the steady stream of ambulances dispatched from all over London under the city's emergency response plan. While viewers from around the world watched in shock and horror at what the media quickly termed Britain's 9/11, the Russian's expression never changed, nor did his breathing rate increase or his blood pressure rise. His eyes simply moved from screen to screen, processing information in much the same way the powerful computer on the desk before him processed data. This would not have been overly remarkable except for the fact that Vasily Andrenov was responsible for the carnage in the streets of London that December evening. Shifting his gaze from the spectacle of violence radiating from the wall of his own personal command center down to his computer, Andrenov checked to ensure the correct stocks were set to automatically begin trading as markets opened across the globe on Monday morning. Satisfied that everything was in order, he took one last long look at the new London he had created before turning in for an early night's sleep. Come Monday, Vasily Andrenov would be an extremely rich man.
Until the next time, take care out there, stay safe, be strong, keep fighting.